And it refers to the thus come one, the mind that comes forward freshly each moment, the Tathagata, the true meaning of this moment, the true meaning of this experience. In Dharma teachings, a lot is said about causes and conditions. Everything depends upon causes and conditions. And actually, part of the meaning of no self, it points to that this experience that we have moment by moment is purely the coming together of all kinds of conditions that are hatching right now as this moment. So everything depends upon causes and conditions. This phrase is used in Dharma teaching all the time. And coincidentally, it's what poetry is all about also, causes and conditions. And I think about William Carlos Williams. Some of you may know his work. That poem in which the words bring up the whole and entire particular world. And the poem is this one. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rain water beside the white chickens. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. Now, when you hear that, the mind is filled with it, huh? We call that filling the mind's eye. Well, our whole experience each moment fills the mind's eye, the heart's eye, the ear's eye. And the world always presents itself in its particulars. And it's always seen from some vantage point or other. So in this poem, we could think, well, so much depends. What depends? Well, for the farmer, so much depends upon the red wheelbarrow that their son left out in the rain, right? So it might have one meaning for the farmer. For the chickens, it might mean, oh, there it is. That's where the corn gets scattered. So they see the red wheelbarrow and they rush in for a good treat. For a painter, so what depends on the red wheelbarrow? Well, the paints that are used to paint it, right? A painter would look at the scene of the red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens, and it would determine the choice of colors and paint. Causes and conditions are the very stuff of any point of view. And they are this very stuff of the self. A brief phrase that refers, causes and conditions refer to the particular details of the infinite, all arising together continually. Even if we don't recognize it as such. Causes, conditions are infinite. Only certain ones come forward to create this particular experience right now. Only so many particulars, so many conditions come together to develop any form. A form that is material, like a red wheelbarrow, or a form that's a thought, are all brought forward because of particular conditions and associations and suggestions of what we call reality. So I wanted to talk about, and I have never heard a talk about causes and conditions where we went into what was referred to there. We usually kind of throw it off as a phrase, and of course phrase, but let's look at causes and conditions, because actually That's what we do in Zen practice. We are, the Dharma, infinitely profound and minutely subtle, minutely detailed. This moment is minutely detailed with no gaps in between the details. So I put together a very small sample of this infinite details that are always evolving and changing and recombining as this moment, perceived by this self, this me. So what makes up the conditions of this moment? Well, the weather, the barometric pressure, our position in relation to the sun and to the moon and the clouds, the sounds that are arising. More of the conditions are our personal state of health, our temperature, our pulse, our blood pressure, our weight. We'll have a very different version of, two people will have a very different version of the experience of walking up a hill. You think of a 120-pound person walking up a hill on their way to lunch. That's one very distinct experience. Or what about if you're a 300-pound person walking up the same hill on your way to the gallows? That's a really different hill. Every detail is colored by every other detail in this interdependently arising moment. So continuing with conditions. So our age determines how it is, how the world is. Our nutritional status, what you eat, what you would never eat. Anybody here eaten grasshoppers or ants in a little chocolate goodie? I remember that being offered at a lunch time at like in 6th grade in the basement cafeteria. So our individual narrative is always made up by this certain set of infinite details, is colored by our life experience, our family of origin, and their experiences going back through time, relationship to money and status, safety, employment, spiritual or religious affiliation, and how it has influenced the behavior and the teachings in the family, in the community. And the same religion, of course, generates many different consequences historically, from providing comfort to grieving parents, or as a source of torture and misery for those who were identified as heretics. All of these are conditions that are always operating in or out of our awareness and contributing to the moment. Religious traditions shape historical narratives. And it can be so surprising to read about a historical period from the viewpoint of each of the players. The moneyed classes will have one set of experiences. The military, the ordinary everyday person will be living in a very different world, all simultaneous, depending on the conditions of their own individual. We call it karma. And when we read the various versions of Buddhist history, again, they vary immensely depending on the individual who is interpreting and reporting their time, their experiences, their degree of commitment, and what they say and what they don't say about the Dharma and what the Dharma is about. Another one of the conditions that really influences out of our awareness directly, we're not often thinking about this, is a modern concept of intelligence. That's a modern concept, intelligence. And as such, we think it's something we either have or we don't have. We are very bright or we're not very bright. Or maybe we've in the latter part of the 20th century, we came into the, I don't know, 5, 7, 9 intelligences. We specialize in the kind of things that we notice and are particularly attuned to, are expert at, are skilled with, really notice and study. So categories and concepts are part of the conditions that influence how we evaluate ourselves and others. And probably one thing that's true for most people gathered on this Zoom meeting is we have a tendency to observe the phenomenal world and our relationship to it. Trees and animals and other human beings. And the meaning we make of these relationships that we observe. And our own internal mind habits of thought and judgment and impulse and how it feels in our bodies. These are all conditions. These are all the conditions that determine this moment's experience. This is called being, in the terminology of intelligence studies, being existentially intelligent. So we Zenis are existentially intelligent because we are interested in our life and we probe. So we can kind of feel like proud. So much for words and concepts. They do represent, our vocabulary represents all kinds of subdivisions of infinity. And anything we don't have words for, we don't tend to be able to notice at all. It's like there's only a certain subset of all the materiality of the world that our senses can pick up. And if we were a different species, we would notice other things. So these are all the conditions that narrow and focus our world. And we take as outside of ourselves, but actually it's really a function of the equipment and functioning of the equipment that we are endowed with as human beings. There are collective narratives, and we see right now we have huge struggles in the world about competing narratives that make for a lot of conflict and war, domination and exploitation, and all sorts of suffering. Other conditions are conditions of class and gender and race and our economic position, our way of relating to that, being served or disserved by the system, weaponry, and what your attitudes are about this. You know, if you're a gun lover, you're going to have one whole set of attitudes. If you're somebody who does not really favor guns, you're going to have a whole different set. You're going to experience the public life very, very differently. And you're going to experience hiking in the woods differently if you're hiking with a weapon or without. Our relationships, our attitudes about technology and their effect on how we think about what it is to be human. Are we intelligent machines? Or are we contemplative creatures? Are we the only species who can be aware and choose? All of these are the conditions that govern how we experience. And these are just a very few, particular threads that make up the warp and weft and woof that weave through and flavor and color each moment altogether, arising fully hatched every moment and continually changing. Though we may not notice. We notice certain kinds of changes. We don't notice other kinds of changes. Some changes happen quickly and some are way more slow. And we can remember when looking into this causes and conditions question that each of us is standing in a different position relative to the circle of life, which emerges whole and complete from all of the standpoints simultaneously. Here we are together, but each person is in such a different spot, even geographically. The world only appears to me. This world is mine. You each would say the same thing. The Buddha, immediately after his birth, is reported to have said, "I alone am the honored one." And you and I am honored by all things in this moment. We are honored with the presentation of the entire world. And we're only aware of our own direct experience. The rest is reportage. Someone telling me about how they experience something or what they think of something, or else what I assume they're experiencing, because according to the appearances. So we have also appearances and experience. And we run into all kinds of issues when we think we know, according to appearances, but actually we don't know the experience of the other. I hope that if anything comes for you from this talk, it's that you start to really notice all of the incredible detail that makes up moment by moment. Not just the usual things like the beautiful red leaves on the maples right now, but every little detail. So let's talk about the self that is no self, in terms of this, the self that is just a functioning of causes and conditions, that each of us experiences on our own as me. We each have a me, which is entirely made up of this ever-changing, ever-recombining set of conditions. And that motivate us and color the individual world that we think is out there. Actually, in that way, it's a collective narrative, right? We live caught up in, and one of the teachings is about samsara, the world of desire and clinging. So we mistake this recombinant moment as independent and lasting and outside of me. This is the nature of being a human being. This is how we be. And when we separate the me inside and the world outside as the whole truth, and are not looking into it a little bit more closely, that's the realm of suffering. In that separation, in that forgetting or lack of awareness. We suffer from the discordance or the gap between what we experience and what's actual. That's where disappointment or anger or impatience or, that's where it all comes out of. But what is actually going on at any minute, at any moment, at any nen is infinite. It's open, unrestricted. Anything can come next. So when the Buddha offers the way to end suffering, he offers this as a way to end suffering, this Buddha way. Let's just consider what is meant by ending suffering. This is like really important to think about. How is this going to work? That this thing that we do, this weird thing that we do every day as we meditate and meet together and practice, this ending of suffering is the stuff of Zen Buddhist practice. And it's the promise of Zen Buddhist practice. Zen has a promise to it. And actually all religions offer a promise. They make a promise. And it's important to consider the promise that our practice holds out for us and not to misunderstand the promise. Miyamoto Musashi, who is this, who wrote the samurai classic of the Book of Five Rings, said, "The path to enlightenment is littered with the bodies of the ignorant." The path to enlightenment is littered with the bodies of the ignorant. When I heard, I guess I heard that the first time from Chozen, and I really sat up and listened when she said that. Made me a little worried. But I think it's pointing to the same question that we're asking here. What is the promise? I have an old friend who's been following the Zen way for many years, 20 some odd years. And even so, still gets caught by suffering. And perhaps she has misunderstood the promise. Perhaps all of us have misunderstood the promise. Her mind is clear about how things work. And she's clear about impermanence. And she's had insight into the experience of the self that is no self. So there's lots of insight. And yet still suffering arises. But somehow we can all get caught in expecting that with clarity, we won't experience suffering or impatience or disappointment or grief. It sounds like misunderstanding the unity of oneness and the absolute, the absolute nature of experience. Misunderstanding the unity of the relative and the absolute life. The life that is filled with particulars, including all of our moods and responses and expectations and likes and dislikes and everything that is the kind of the emotional quality of being a human being, continues, hopefully, even as our Dharma eye gets wide open and knows the nature. And somewhere in there is the ending of suffering. But we can fall into expecting that the world of samsara will move aside for nirvana. We're pitting samsara against nirvana. And there's the misunderstanding, I think, about the practice. That on the other side of awakening lies nirvana, as though there are sides. How many of us take literally the image that's used to describe awakening, which is arriving on the other shore? We build a raft, which is terrific. Yeah, I just want to finish up. So this shore, the other shore, all of this are metaphors. And our experience is not a metaphor, it is actual. So the river, this shore, that shore, the raft, the practitioner, you or me, come forward as infinite mind. We emerge in 1 minute, 1 moment, 1 dharma. Nothing is left out. Nothing is left behind. Causes and conditions to continue to unfold as the illusioning mind. So we're arriving at the other shore every moment, as Dario just was saying, except when we forget to arrive fully in this moment, which is our human moment. We're always human. There are no Buddhas without human beings. And sometimes we human beings see dawn only dimly through the dark clouds. We know it only dimly through the dark clouds of samsara. But then at other times, those clouds are nowhere to be seen. But when we are awake, we know about weather. We know the condition of our life is a giant, ever-changing weather pattern. So the promise of Zen practice is to recognize the dream within the dream and awaken to our place in infinity and behold with awe through the human eye and the human heart. We practice, we awaken, the heart breaks open, and we realize and bear witness to the suffering that this restricted view of the nature of life tethers us to as human beings. And yet, there is no tether. So we can all relax. We are not tethered. And now that's that. Thank you for listening.